Greetings, friends. I trust everyone is doing well. One of the readings this week is a very well-beloved passage from the book of Isaiah. You're going to recognize it when I read it to you. And as I do, I want you to just listen carefully to the words. It is very poetic, very profound, very powerful, and very compelling. He says in Isaiah 40, beginning at verse 21, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown. Scarcely has their stock taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them, and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. To whom then will you liken me, that I would be his equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high, and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their host by number. He calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." We love this passage, but we often fail to think of it in terms of how the people who this was written to heard it. Well, who was this written to? Isaiah here is prophesying of the Babylonian captivity, when the sons of Israel have experienced the devastation of Nebuchadnezzar coming in with his armies, as Habakkuk envisioned, in this great cloud coming from the north of Palestine, coming in to invade, when God said to Habakkuk, "The just shall live by faith." And while Babylon is laying siege to Jerusalem, the party line prophets are saying everything's going to be fine. We win, we win, we win. And Jeremiah, the true prophet of God, is saying, no, we're going into exile. And nobody wanted to hear Jeremiah. They threw him in a pit. They silenced his voice. The king himself said, "You're a liar." But they went into Babylon. You know, in the Old Testament, any of the prophets that prophesied for a king were false prophets. Go back and read the record. The true prophets always spoke truth to power, and they called the kings to account, to holiness, to righteousness, to living in ways that bring justice, to not compromise by being like the other nations, because they led their people into sin and idolatry like the other nations, which is why they were going into exile. And the exiles didn't want to listen to Jeremiah either, because the popular party line prophets were saying this isn't going to happen. Well, it happened. And here they are sitting by the waters of Babylon, weeping when they remember Zion, because they saw the entire city laid waste. This city that was supposed to abide forever. Every stone has been burned and destroyed. The holy utensils have been taken away and brought into the Babylonian gods' palaces. Are the Babylonian gods more powerful than God? Why has God allowed this to happen? Well, what choices did they make? When God said, when you come into the land, don't forget the Lord your God, the creator of the ends of the earth. Don't forget him and go worshiping the gods of the cultures. Don't try to be like the people that I'm driving out of the land. Don't try to mimic them or be like them. You're not called to fit in. You're called to stand out. There was so much compromise. The history of Israel is that they spent generations anticipating the promised land, and generations grieving the loss of the promised land, and less time in the promised land, precisely because they committed idolatry. and they wanted to be like the nations. They didn't want to stand out. They wanted to fit in. They wanted to be like everybody else. Cultural accommodation is alive and well. And when it is alive and well, God will shake everything that can be shaken and allow those things that would oppress us to get our attention. Job says, you have opened my ears in oppression. We don't want to hear that. But right now, everything that can be shaken is being shaken. And we're coming back to two things. The God who is transcendent and the God who is immanent is the creator of the ends of the earth. And he's also the one who sent his son to redeem us from our own foolishness, our own folly, to teach us how to walk with him, how to be mounted up with him, and how to run with him. Discerning of spirits is not an option. We participate in the evil that goes on in the culture every time we capitulate to the culture and want to be like the culture. So it's not that our ways are hidden from God. It's that there are choices that we made that determine the outcomes we got, that cause us to be in a place where we are. And maybe right now it's time to start listening to God again and get reacquainted with the God who raises one up and exalts another and tears one down and reverses things. God is God. God is sovereign. We are not. God is all-powerful. We are not. God is totally other, holy, totally other. And we need to understand that when Isaiah saw him, the one who is totally other, high and lifted up, holy, 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 he says, I am undone. And this one who is totally other has also become one of us. He became truly human. God from God, light from light, begotten, not made, of one essence, one being with the Father. He became as we are in Christ, that we might become as he is, to become partakers of the divine nature. So this utterly transcendent God becomes God with us. He comes to be with us because he loves us that much. He gives himself for us. And Christ becomes the reuniting of heaven and earth. We are not forsaken. Christ is with us. Our way is not hidden from the Lord. Christ is with us. But we need to lift our vision on high, as Isaiah says. Even in the midst of where we feel oppressed, even in the midst of where we feel forsaken, even if we feel like we're having to sing the Lord's song in a strange land, we need to elevate our vision and realize that God is sovereign. And in realizing he is sovereign, we can get caught up to meet him by the wings of the great eagle Christ, to recognize that he has caused us to be seated with him, far above all rule and authority and power, and every name that is named, not only in this age but in the one to come. This Christ who broke into time and space in the incarnation and changed the way time is understood is also the Christ who is the beginning and the end, who calls us from the future to the future, because God is going to sum up everything in Christ, and every choice you make has an impact on God summing up everything in Christ, which is why every one of us is part of God's restoration plan. And every one of us is responsible for what we think, what we say, what we do, and what we feel. So we can't pawn it off on the devil made me do it, because principalities and powers need human beings to cooperate with them. James in his epistle talks about selfish ambition and bitter jealousy and how we lust and don't have, so we commit murder. There are things that we do that are based on corrupt wisdom that James says is earthly, natural, and demonic. It's not peaceable. It's not full of good fruits and righteousness. What is God looking for? He's looking for the character of Jesus in us. He's looking for what Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. So he says, they that wait upon the Lord, they that hope, that wait, that expect. But that word wait is a very specific word picture in the Hebrew. And it's from the same root as the tikvah, which is the scarlet cord that Rahab hung out the window when Joshua promised them that they would be delivered and spared when Jericho was destroyed. That scarlet cord was made of 3 strands, a braid. When a mom makes a braid for a daughter's hair, she takes a central strand of that braid, which in and of itself could easily, that central strand could be broken, but it's made stronger by the fact that another strand of hair is wrapped clockwise and another one counterclockwise, so it's a cord of 3 strands that can't be easily broken. Christ has called us to the Father by the Spirit. So the Spirit apprehends us and lays hold of us. That's that central braid. Weak as we are, the all-powerful one comes to us in our weakness, our exhaustion, our weariness, and our feeling like we're hidden, and we're in a dark place. Everything God does, he starts in the dark. Give God your darkness and recognize your greatest creativity is going to come out of your darkness, as Charles Simpson says. Christ was born in the dark. Christ wasn't born at night. He was born in the dark. There was evening and morning. The first day, the Hebrew calendar always begins in the dark. God always begins in the dark. Your way is not hidden. Darkness and light are alike to him. And he lays hold of you in the dark. And the Spirit wraps the Son around you and the Father around you so that you are caught up into the fellowship of the triune life. And in that, there's a renewal of your strength. That word renew means to exchange. It means you give up your powerlessness for his strength and power. You give up all that you are for all that he is. He becomes all that you are so that you might become all that he is. So you give him your weakness. You give him your failings. You give him your brokenness. He gives you his wholeness. He gives you his peace. He gives you his well-being. He gives you his opportunity that you might flourish. And that's how you mount up. You begin from being seated in heavenly places. Job has to learn that he's not called to be in the ash heap. He's called to be seated far above all rule and authority with Christ in the ultimate end of the story. Because the end of all God's dealings is that God is gracious and compassionate and abundant in loving kindness. Our way is not hidden from God. And the workings of the powers of darkness are so intricately involved in the choices we make that we fail to discern good and evil. But it takes maturity of our spiritual senses to discern good and evil so that we wisely choose in every decision we make, in every thought we think, in every act we commit, in every word we speak to glorify Christ. There is a dance that goes on between the powers of darkness and human beings that have a tendency to want to rebel against God. And you need to know we start from a place of brokenness. Yes, we are saved, but we're still being saved. So we still have a proclivity. We've been delivered from sin's power, but not from its presence. It's easy for us to sin. Take a look at how you do it on a daily basis and how you have to ask forgiveness. And yes, you do have to ask forgiveness. And yes, you do still fall short. If you think you don't sin, the truth isn't in you, John the Beloved says. Because you and I need to comprehend that the choices we make have consequences. And God isn't mocked. Whatever we sow, we reap. So as we embrace Christ, as we're caught up into the fellowship of the Father and the Son by the Spirit, braided, intertwined with the Father and the Son by the Spirit, we gain strength. We exchange our weakness for his strength, and we mount up with wings, the wings of the great eagle Christ. He bears us up on the eagle's wings, which is Jesus, the incarnation. And we are seated like the Gadarene demoniac who, after his encounter with Christ, is clothed, seated, and in his right mind. We are given the mind of Christ. And then we get grounded once again. We come in for a landing in the earthly arena, because to be spiritual is to be human. And we run with the vision, even as Habakkuk had to, even though he looked out the city wall and the watchtower and saw the Babylonians coming in, foretelling what Isaiah was going to deal with when the Babylonian exiles were going to have to cry out to God and say, we feel like we're being treated unjustly. God is a just God. God's allowing us the consequence. God will punish all disobedience, Paul says, when our obedience is complete. We've got to take every thought captive and everything that exalts itself above the knowledge of God. Idolatry and sin are deeply related, and there's a lot of it going on in our culture. Our cultural idols have sucked us into deception. And party line prophets have told us it's all going to be fine. It's not. Everything that can be shaken is being shaken. And we would do well to pay attention to that, so that we could mount up with wings like eagle, lift our vision on high, and understand that we need to see a big picture of Christ calling us from the future to the future, because God is going to sum up everything in Jesus, and then come in for a landing and run with the vision, and then slow down to the speed of the walk of faith, one step at a time, so that we can live out the crucified life and bear witness to Jesus in everything we think, we say, we do, and we feel. I pray this touches you in a place of awareness, no matter what you feel, distressed, downcast, weary, or exhausted. He's a good God. He's up to something good. He's at work in the dark. Trust him, abide in him, run with him, walk with him. Everything is going to be all right if you'll do that. If you have no place to worship on Sunday, join us at COTLE Orlando, online or in person. I trust God will give you a great and gracious weekend. Blessings.